We've looked at text-to-self connections. And now we're going to have a look at text-to-text connections. What do we mean by that? When we connect text to other texts, it's also to make this reading process just so much more of an enriching experience. And we need to become very conscious of this. We need to think about it because if we don't, and we just read what we have in front of us and we don't think further than that, it's really going to limit our understanding and our appreciation of what we're reading. Deliberately ask yourself, when I'm reading this text, have I viewed or have I read anything similar to this before? Have I read anything like that before? Ask how this text, this novel, is perhaps similar to another text that you read or viewed. And the more you read, the more interesting it's going to become. And you're going to start seeing connections that you've never ever thought about before. And it really becomes intriguing to do that. So how is it similar to another text that I've read? And how is it different from something on the same theme, but it's different from the other text? But somehow there's a connection, but it's different. How is it different? Remember I said that texts are also texts, not only that you read, but texts that you write, that you create yourself. So you might be writing an essay and suddenly you think, wow, I've just written this creative essay and suddenly I'm thinking, it reminds me of a short story that I read once. How is it similar? How is it different from that short story? And then also in terms of something specific in questions, have I been asked to make specific text comparisons in a question? Now, you are going to be asked to make this kind of intertextual comparisons. It's going to be very pertinent in your exams. So look out for these questions, for instance, in paper 1 in the comprehension, where you have two different texts. They will be different. The one will be a written text, the one will be visual. It will be a graph, it will be a cartoon, it will just be a picture, it will be something visual. So two totally different texts where you're going to have to look for the similarities, the differences, etc. So the compare and contrast type of questions are typically the ones that relate to your being able to connect texts to other texts and ask yourself certain questions about it. So also in the visual literacy section, you will probably sometimes be given two advertisements, totally different advertisements. And you're going to have to look at the similarities, the differences, thematic things that overlap, etc. Questions about that will be asked. And then also in cartoons, you might be given two different cartoons or a cartoon and another aspect of the media that you might have to compare in terms of themes and so on. So don't think that we're just saying these things, that you just need to go and do text to text. It is actually quite relevant to your actual exams, right? You're looking at similarities in genre, content, etc., and differences, and also what have you learned. Now, the moment you start thinking, what have I learned from these comparisons and so on, you are immediately, can you see, going into the text to self kind of mode. And you can't eventually, at the end of the day, you can't really separate the text to self and text to text because they all work in your own head. So, and you might also be asked questions on that. So remember, we said from the beginning that this is a holistic way of learning. So remember that, please. Now, just as an example, we have spoken about themes, and we have said that a theme is something that is very wide, very specific, right, in terms of a text. It is like the essence of what this text is all about, and it does not elaborate. It is said in key term. It's just like feminine values, for instance. Now, if we looked at that theme, feminine values, we can have a look at various texts from various time periods, and we're going to see how feminine values or feminine views, that is the theme, have changed, and how in each specific one of these texts a different message comes across. In other words, we said theme, essence, message, elaboration. How something is said about female values in this specific and that specific text. Right, so if we look at this, we can look at a theme, and let's make it feminine views or feminine values. And we see here a text. It is a visual text. It's a cartoon. And we see two women. Their hairstyles look pretty modernish. They are wearing mini skirts. They look as though they're in a corporate environment. They're wearing heels and they're carrying papers, work under their arms and so on. So they look as though they're in the corporate world, that they are working women. And we can say that here is a contemporary view of how women think, or women, a view on women's values. And we're going to look at their words and try to get a message. I haven't decided whether or not I want children, but I know I don't want any husbands. So what about feminine values or feminine views are elaborated upon here? It is that some women in contemporary times feel that they don't mind having children, but marriage is becoming an old-fashioned concept. Make sense? So that might be the message that we get from this one. We can obviously compare it to another, perhaps an article that we read. We can compare this cartoon with an article, and we can see that the person who wrote this also wrote about a contemporary view, in other words, young modern women. So there are two contemporary views that we are now going to compare. Female, never married, better educated, employed, and relatively secularized individuals, in other words, they're not overly religious, hold less traditional views about marriage and children in all countries. Now, this is a factual article, and you can see that it actually supports what the cartoon has said about the contemporary views. They have different views. They don't have the traditional views anymore. I don't really have to get married. Do I really have to have a husband? I can still have a child. So that's the one. And then when we go a bit back and we go to 1929, we go, it's not contemporary times anymore. It is like the previous century. At the beginning of the previous century, we see there was a feminist movement, and you've all heard about Virginia Woolf and her writing, her feminist writing. And she wrote an essay in which she argues that a woman, in order to write and to retain her creative independence, remember it's a time when women were seen as that they couldn't be writers, and she was fighting for that. And she says that a woman, in order to write and to retain her creative independence, needs a room of her own. Can you see that already there, moving away from the idea of a husband that's around all the time? Can she just please have a room of her own and just be the woman she is and the writer that she is, and be her own person? So you can already see how it started in the previous century already. And this room of her own must have a lock, with a lock. And of course, she wants the £500 a year, which is about £30,000 a year in today's terms. So we can see Virginia Woolf here being with her feet in two different worlds here. She wants to be independent. She doesn't want a husband around all the time, but she still wants an allowance. Do you understand? Which comes from the previous century. So women's views, yeah. And then, of course, when we go back, we go to the 19th century, one century back, we see where this comes from. It was this whole thing about having to marry a man because a woman could not survive on her own. She could not hold a job, and she had to have a man in order to be looked after. And therefore, marriage seemed extremely favorable. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, and from love to matrimony in a moment. So can you see how that changed a century later with Virginia Woolf, and then how, when we move on to contemporary times, how things have changed altogether, and now marriage has not become a very popular subject for women. So another one of the quotes from this century, from Pride and Prejudice: "It is a truth," can you see the truth, "universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune," think of that money that Virginia Woolf was talking about, "must be in want of a wife." So the perceptions have changed through the centuries. It's still the same theme, women's views, right? About marriage, for instance, but differing. You've got the different texts. So examples of text-to-text connections, what you should be doing when you are studying your prescribed works, for instance. You look at your prescribed novel, for instance. Very important to remember that if you are studying a novel, you're studying the novel, you don't go and study the film. However, if you've studied the novel and you've understood the novel, very enriching then to perhaps watch a film rendition of it. It's a different genre altogether, and you're going to find that some of the facts might be changed. It might not resemble the novel very well in certain aspects, but it doesn't matter because it's a different genre altogether, and that is the point of that text. So go and watch a film production. Can you see how you can compare? Then you can compare, but you must know the novel, because it was intended to be a novel. And then you look at the film and you compare. Ask yourself. Now you do the text to self as well. Do I like it? What do I like most? Do I think it is the ideas in the book are well portrayed in the film, or don't I think so? Am I criticizing it? So also, what about looking at, say, Hamlet that you're studying? Study the drama first, and then go watch a stage production, because that's what it's meant for, really. Go and see how the stage production just elaborates on your understanding of what's going on in the text, and preferably go and watch a second and a third, if you like, stage production. And then if you want to, watch a film rendition of it, and that it can all just widen your perspective. But you must never ever forget, please, that eventually you will be tested on the novel and the drama that you've studied. But this is just such a widening and an enriching experience to make these connections. So you can take the different genres, as I said, drama, film. You can take the same genre. You can look at poems. You might be a great lover of love poems. You might be a great lover of elegies, or whatever kinds of poetry you can think of. The same genre. You might love dramas. So take the same genre and look at the or poems with the same theme. For instance, poems is a genre. So look at poems with the same theme and go and read some love poems, more and more and more love poems. Look at different film renditions. It is the same genre, and go and see the various film renditions and compare it. They often make remakes and so forth. So, or go and look at two different theatre productions of a drama and look at the similarities and the differences, how they depicted certain characters, what props they used, what costumes they used, what they emphasized, etc. And you decide eventually what you have found most enjoyable. And that is just for yourself, it's for your own enrichment, and for you to have something to use in a conversation, for instance. But please remember also that, like I said before, be cautioned that eventually you cannot go and bring in what you've seen in a film which is not in the book, for instance. You have to go and separate these genres, separate the texts, but you can compare them and decide what you liked most. Just look at a few quotes on beauty, for instance. Beauty is the theme. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all we know on earth and all you need to know. Read it. Think about it. What do you think of it? It's from John Keats, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Another one about beauty. Beauty is truth's smile. When she beholds her own face in the perfect mirror. Okay, go and think about that one and think how you feel about it. We are comparing texts with the same theme. And then finally, Khalil Gibran. And if you haven't read Khalil Gibran yet, make a plan. Where shall you seek beauty? And how shall you find her? Unless she herself be your way and your guide. And how shall you speak of her, except she be the weaver of your speech? Another little one to ponder. Go and think about it and ask yourself, which of those did you like most? Learn to go and compare texts. So, in this regard, experiment, as I say, even in your own writing, interact, become creative, use different genres, the same theme, the same story, the same work of literature, compare, etc. And then why eventually are we therefore saying that you should make text-to-text connections? Apart from the fact that, like I said, you're going to be tested in the exam to do it. But it's going to make you a better reader. It's going to make you a better writer. It's going to help you in other subjects. You'll be surprised. It's going to help you in other subjects. It's going to improve your critical thinking because you're comparing, you're contrasting, you're deciding which is better, and your analysis. And of course, it will develop your writing skills. Now, isn't that great?